Welcome back to the next episode of the Keto Naturopath on YouTube. So today we're going to talk about more about how to do more precisely the protein sparing modified fast. We're going to talk about sarcopenia, we're going to talk about older people, and we're going to talk about younger people. My goal is to have it so you understand how to use a protein sparing modified fast, or if it's not a protein sparing modified fast, the value of having protein, sufficient amount of protein in your diet, and what an incredible change that will have. And by not having sufficient amount of protein in your diet, you will incur unnecessary problems across the arc of your own lifetime. So let's get into it. So the first concept that I want to talk about is sarcopenia. So sarcopenia is generally referred to as age-related muscle mass loss. So what happens? As we get older, it's more difficult to make muscle mass. So muscle protein synthesis, MPS, that's more difficult. And for whatever reason, muscle breakdown, protein breakdown happens much more easily. Kind of unfair, huh? It's tilted in one direction. That's the way it goes. But there's things you can do about it to tilt it back in your direction as you get older. So what is older? Well, classically, what people refer to as older relative to this particular group of this age group that's affected by sarcopenia or could be affected by sarcopenia is 50 and older. But it also affects anyone really 20 years of age or older that is inactive. So inactivity in its own sense, in its own right, so to say, will create muscle loss, or it will create more muscle breakdown than muscle buildup. So prior to age 20 or your early 20s, you have so much in the way of hormones and so on, it takes very little. Your body's about growing, right? So when you grow, you don't consciously go, I'm going to go out and grow today. What do I need to grow today? I want to be another inch taller, so what do I do to get taller? It just happens and you reach your normal height. At least that's how I understand it right now, okay? So muscles are pretty much that way too. But after you finish growing, your bones are going to be the same size and so on and so forth. It's really, the onus is on you to decide how much muscle mass you want to have. And I'm not saying you need to be a bodybuilder. I'm saying you need an appropriate amount of muscle mass because your muscle mass is your reservoir for protein, which your immune system depends on. It also, by a lot of other factors involved, a lot of hormonal factors involved, but one I'll throw out by engaging in physical activity, and we'll get much more specific later on in subsequent videos, is that you improve your mind. There's a thing called brain-derived neurotropic factor, which increases, growth hormone increases when you work out. We'll get into that later. It's very fascinating. So I hope that will be enough to get you to think about exercise. And specifically, we're going to talk about resistance training, okay? All right, so that was sarcopenia. Now let me show you what that looks like. So sarcopenia in obese people can look like this. Somebody can be obese and be under-muscled, so they're very thin. It'd be sarcopenia. Here you're going to have obese with normal muscle mass, so they're not sarcopenic. And then you can have, this is hypertrophy. This is kind of the obese person with high muscle mass. What does that mean? Well, really, that's the Arnold Schwarzenegger image of years ago, back in his day. It's all muscle was hypertrophied and a big muscle guy, right? Back when he was doing the movies Conan the Barbarian. Think of that person. Okay, what about smaller people? So with a much smaller BMI, basal metabolic index, you can have a little person, it's underweight, and also is sarcopenic. You can have I won't say a little person, but just they're not huge. Normal weight with low muscle mass, an obese with low muscle mass, and then morbidly obese with low muscle mass. So the health dangers I'm trying to point out are not strictly, but in this case, we're going to talk about its muscle. Before I've talked about metabolic issues. So when we talk about obese and morbidly obese people that have low muscle mass, they have not only a metabolic disorder, but they are doubly put themselves at risk for a lot of other disorders and subsequent diseases, okay? One issue that comes up, and it's the expression called TOFI. It's not on the outside. and fat on the inside. Then on the outside, fat on the inside. I want to show you what that looks like. So these are two cross sections from your abdomen. So you're looking down your spine, you're looking down to your feet, so to say. And so the top one is all the white is fat. So all the fat that is surrounding this particular individual is subcutaneous or cutaneous fat. So that's fat on the outside. And they're thin on the inside. Fat on the outside, thin on the inside. So this is a TOFI person. This person is, this person is a TOFI person. This is moderately fat on the outside, a lot less, and fat on the inside. Thin-ish on the outside, fat-ish on the inside. Okay, this is the difference between basically young and old, pretty straightforward. This is a cross-section of your leg, and it's a DEXA scan. And what it shows is basically muscle loss that comes with age. So this is arguably the same type of person. And it's just, if you don't take care of it, and we're going to hit two variables we're going to talk about today to change this, so you don't have to end up looking that way. So the nice thing about this kind of topic, it's something you can do for yourself, and it's something you can do for yourself immediately. Okay? All right, so what we have is age-related decline in muscle mass, sarcopenia. And you need muscle mass not only for stability and mobility, but you need it for your immune system, et cetera, for hormonal system. And all that's fun to talk about, but we won't be doing that here right now. This is a cross-section of your leg, 40-year-old athlete. You can see it's mostly muscle, a little bit of fat. This is a 74-year-old sedentary person, mostly fat, a little bit of muscle. And here's a 70-year-old athlete. You go, wow, look at this relative to the 40-year-old athlete. Nothing's changed in 40 years. In fact, it almost looks like it's bigger. Good for them. Good for them. So what you need to know is of your macronutrients, right? So of your fat, carbohydrates, and protein, only your fats and carbohydrates are used as energy. Only your fats and carbohydrates are used as energy, not protein. Protein is structure. Protein is muscle, it's bones, et cetera, but not protein. We'll get into what protein does for your blood glucose levels later, not in today's video. As you get older, so what I told you was sarcopenia is also referred to as anabolic resistance of muscle protein in aging. So that simply means it's harder for you to build muscle as you get older. Definitely over 50, for a lot of people over 20. And it's a lot easier for your muscles to go away, to break down. So muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein breakdown. You can see the synthesis is negligible. The breakdown is noticeable. Negligible, noticeable, negligible, so on and so forth. And this is saying when you eat, which we've talked about before, when you eat protein, you do stimulate muscle protein synthesis. You make muscle mass. That's a gift. You don't have to do anything. You just get it by eating it. All right, this is a concept we're going to explore today. So the difference between younger people and older people is they need more protein. They need more protein. We're not talking about activity or exercise or anything. They need to eat more protein. How do we know that? Well, there's plenty of studies, and I've referenced most of the pictures I have here as to who did the original work, but we've already talked about that concept. So here, I'm not going to get that technical today. Here we see that, all right, well, how much protein would you need to eat, and beyond what point would there not be any benefit? So this is what that is. Here's the increase, and beyond that point of a young person, of an old person, there's no worth to it. It's not going to increase any particular benefit, certainly not going to increase your muscle mass. All right, so as a younger person, anywhere between 1 and 1.25 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And for an older person, over 50 now we're talking, really it's almost twice that much, 1.6 to 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's well known. So now I just wanted to check that box off. If you have a mother or a parent, or you're getting older yourself, you need to move the dial up. You don't eat what your kids eat or ate if they're still having kids at home and having dinner with them. You need to eat more So dad's got to have a steak and a half or something like that. Okay, now we're going to talk about, generally speaking, for everybody, regardless of age, for everybody, when you eat protein, you get a bump up in muscle protein synthesis. And then when you don't, so the question comes, or you eat protein, you can't be eating protein all the time. Would you get this one great big arc? Not quite, right? Remember we talked about how it flattens out? So we need to know how much you need to eat. And we actually calculated this last time, but we're going to go over it again. You need to eat enough to give you your peak muscle protein synthesis. And then time will go by. So how many times per day should you eat just on eating, just the effect of consuming protein, whole food sources of protein? Any guesses? Well, I'm going to come back to that. First, I'm going to show you, if you throw in resistance training, so resistance training is pushing against resistance. Resistance meaning what? Resistance meaning weights. It's weight workout. Could be machine, but for the most part, it's free weights. Look what happened. Look what happened. I want you to look again. Just the fact, we'll put these in the same frame, just the difference across all age groups, just the difference of working out is going to stimulate more muscle protein stimulus. So you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck. For all the protein you ate, but then you worked out, you doubled the effect of muscle protein synthesis. That's pretty cool. And you minimized the breakdown of muscle protein breakdown. Pretty cool. More creation, less breaking down. More creation, less breaking down. So that's the second variable. First was, well, how much did you eat? You want to eat enough so you maximize the benefit the protein will give you merely by consuming it. And then you want to work out. Doesn't mean you work out every day. We'll get into that. All right, maybe next time. So here we go. What it ends up is that if you can eat at least 4 times a day, because once you stop eating, muscle protein synthesis will decline. So 4 times a day is pretty much what most people can handle. And people are really trying to push how much muscle protein synthesis they can manage in a day. How do you maximize that? Well, you can only eat so much protein. As I told you, that just flattens out. You eat more than that, and you're limited by appetite as well. So if more than that, that's a waste. And when you work out, you don't need to be working out 10 times a day. In fact, you don't even need to work out every day because your body takes longer to rebuild. But here we go. 4 times a day, you extend that effect of muscle protein synthesis. But the biggest decline that you can probably anticipate of muscle breaking down, what is my muscle breaking down? If it's building up after I've eaten and if it's building up after I've worked out, and that's actually really about a 48-hour window when you start putting these together. But the biggest period of muscle breakdown is when you sleep. So the muscle you had created before you went to bed is less in the morning when you wake up. So what you could do is have a protein snack before you go to bed. And it doesn't have to be that precise. You don't go up, I'm going to bed now. I think I'll have my grilled chicken or whatever. You could do that. But as long as within a couple hours of you going to bed of a fairly high protein, that measured amount of protein for your serving, you'll be fine. So now we're really at five snacks, if you will, 5 servings of protein maximizes the effectiveness of protein. So if you had all this protein in one meal, for one, it would be kind of hard to do because that's a lot of protein. A lot of chicken or beef or whatever it is, your form of whole food source of protein. We're not talking protein powders at all. We're not talking collagen at all. It would be a big difference. So to break it up, and most people can't do 5 servings unless you really are focused as you're a gym rat and this is your thing in life. Nobody wants to be that disciplined. Oh, I gotta have my protein. Oh, I gotta have my protein. If you reasonably, in terms of a regular person, you introduced weight-resistant working out, and you had at least, 3 meals in which you took your total and broke it up into 3, that's a big deal. You've in essence really maximized to an extent. You could then break it up into 5 if you want to, but you don't have to. This isn't the way you have to do it. This is just a suggestion to maximize, to improve, to optimize your diet, really. Okay, so there we go. If you have a snack before you go to bed, now you've shortened the window of protein breaking down. So what do we need? We talked about this last week, and we talked about your ideal body weight, and I gave you a formula that's very easy to remember, right? The formula is 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. So ideal body weight you can look up, and it's no big secret. And there's probably 10 different calculators out there, and there's tables just like this that are all within a pound or two. So it's not highly technical. And as you get close to your weight, you can change this up. So what that equals is 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And what's really interesting is that, as I mentioned before, this is what my mother told me back in the 70s of what that was, and she learned it in the 40s and 50s. And guess what? Only now are they verifying, yeah, actually you could have 2.2 grams, and that's not even your maximum amount. That's really what you should be having. So not everything has to be new. It's just more sciences back this up. A man that is 5'10", 162 pounds are their ideal body weight. 1 pound per gram would be 162 grams per day. You break that up into 5 meals, that's 30 grams per snack or meal, whatever you want to call it. Or if you want to do 3, then you figure it out. Divide 162 by 3. So for women, it's pretty similar. Let's say 5'4" woman, ideal body weight is 125 pounds, 125 grams of protein, and there you go. So I want to show you, this has been going around the internet, and it's really interesting when you see other people's research. It always comes down to they have this number called referenced weight, referenced body weight. They don't say ideal body weight. So finally I dug this up, and what that is, from things like Verta Health, and the Diet Doctor uses this and so on, this is based on an insurance company's weight scale from 1959. So it's only 72 years out of date. And I'm not saying that everything has changed, but in 1959, what they thought was normal clearly isn't normal by a long shot. But I thought I would show you the comparative change. So for a woman, 5'4", they were saying the average weight should be 131 pounds. That's the range, and I just gave you the average. So let's see, 131 pounds versus 125. So they were 6 pounds heavier. But when you compared it to a man, 5'10", we said the average was 162 pounds for your ideal body weight. Here they're saying it's 157 pounds for ideal body weight. Take it for what it's worth. It's minor in the bigger picture. But I want to reference, how do we know? I don't think everything is worth further exploration. So we never definitively know, but we know a lot. And so generally, and this is from Dr. Lehman, PhD, and he is at the University of Indiana, I believe. Good graph, that's why I called this in. This is what your RDA is, 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram, 0.8. That's laughably under recommended. It's a joke. Remember I said the 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight works out to be, per pound of body weight works out to be 2.2. Even that is not the highest point. So there's plenty of room to improve upon that. But the problem when you look at, well, how much protein can I have before it's too much? Well, let me dismiss a few things. To think that your bones are going to dissolve or you're going to get cancer has not been verified. I mean, there's no studies on there. It's laughable, it's jokeable, and it's not true. There's one that says, oh, you take so much protein, it's going to stimulate your mTOR, and your mTOR is going to set you up for cancer. There's one paper, they called it the Livingston paper, and it's never been reproduced. So with that, I feel great because this is where I've gone for the last 7 years or so. Certainly the last 2 years of really honing down on this. And it's working for me, and it works for a lot of people. And you don't have to measure things out. This is a conversation we only need to have once. After that, you go, this is what I need. I'm just going to eat per appetite. I'll show you why. Okay, but here's what we're talking about. That's the range is much higher than what is formally talked about. So here's from another study. I should have referenced this, but it's pretty much what I said last week. 20 grams of protein, 1/4 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight per meal is what they studied, and they generalized it and said for young men. So is that a young man of 5.2 or is that a young man of 6.8? I have no idea, but they generalized it and they basically said this means 18.2 grams, they rounded it up to 20 grams of protein per meal. And they're assuming 5 meals per day, so that's 120 grams per day per a young man. So I have no idea what the height is. But the point is, and I showed you this last week, your limitation is not going to be how much you can have. Your limitation is going to be your appetite. When you have very little protein, you tend to overeat. That means it's going to be you'll be eating more fat and carbs. That's the standard American diet. Too little protein, 10%, too much carbs and fat. But as the amount of protein increases, your appetite decreases. So even way out here, it's 70% protein, which is pretty much whole food source of protein. If you had only protein, fish, chicken, beef, etc., that you would probably be eating half your calories. And this is why people get lean on a protein-sparing modified fast. It's really pretty remarkable, but this is why people drop weight if they're overweight. If they're not overweight and they start eating more protein, well, they're going to find they're going to want a little more fat. And maybe they can have a little more carbohydrates, but their appetite is going to determine that. So 4 things you got to do, as we talked about before: ideal body weight chart, you got that. You calculate the amount of protein. It's 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. Pretty easy formula, don't you think? You get a food scale, you measure it out. Here we go, slapped on a piece of chicken. This is raw chicken, skinless raw chicken. 120 grams in this piece of chicken. Okay, so that would mean, and I put down, there's the man of 5'10", there's a woman of 5'4". That means that piece of chicken, and it's a bad picture of it because it's much bigger, looks like a much bigger piece of chicken. It's 13.4 ounces, by the way, so that's a big piece. Would be just not even enough for a woman to have. She would need a little more. And certainly, a man that's 5'10", basically myself, would need another 40 grams of protein in that day. Okay, so what would I recommend? What are the sources? The best sources are what we call whole food sources of protein: lean chicken, lean turkey, fish, lean pork, pork loin, pork chops, visible fat removed, canned fish, sardines, mackerel. You notice I don't say tuna. Tuna, by this conversation, is fine, but the problem with tuna is it's so mercury laden. It's a little bit like saying, oh, go on, have a little mercury on a regular basis. So we took that off the list. I know that from practice. People who go and just have tuna are going to have neurological conditions, unfortunately. We've polluted the oceans. What do you expect? All right, canned fish, egg whites, liquid or protein. And this is basically what Judy makes her protein bread from. What not to eat? Don't have dairy. Another issue. High-fat beef, such as ribeye, check out. They're just too fat. Take them off. Save them for the weekend. Save them for when you're not doing this. Protein powders are not something you're going to have. But we will talk about protein later. So this is it. This is what we're talking about. Real food, real whole food sources of protein. This is how you optimize. You make sure you have enough on a per meal basis, and you bring in some weight-resistant training. We'll get into more specific on weight-resistant training, but I think this is a good place to start. Till next time. Bye-bye.